Welcome to Draft FC's Road to Draft Day 2025. This episode was not slated in my schedule of content this summer, but there have been a whole host of changes announced to the FPL game over the last day or two, which we need to cover because although they're not directly for the Draft FPL game, they will definitely impact us as Draft FPL managers, I think for the better. Change is generally good when it comes to FPL because we don't get a huge amount of it to chew on. So without further ado, let's get into it. Welcome back to the Draft FC podcast, the podcast website and YouTube channel dedicated to all things official Draft FPL. My name is Mitch and I'm your host for the first in our Road to Draft Day 2025 series. As I said at the beginning, having a look at some of the changes that have been announced in the last day or so from FPL that will impact us as Draft FPL managers. As I said, they are not changes to the draft game per se. I'm not expecting to see any, at least there haven't been any announced as far as we know just yet. But given that I'm recording this in Saturday evening, Saturday 19th of July, we're expecting the game to launch on Monday, Tuesday at the latest. So I think if there were any changes that were directly going to impact the draft game, we probably would have heard them by now. You may have already noticed, especially for those watching on YouTube, that there has been a slight update to the visuals, and not least, if there's one thing we like here at Draft FC, it's a new logo. Draft FC Kieran has got his teeth into the visuals yet again. Some of you who were members at the back end of last season would have seen some updates to the visuals on the site as well, which were featuring this logo, so it might not be new for all of you watching. But yeah, you will notice some hopefully slicker changes to the visuals this year, not just in the pod, but obviously on the website too, which if you haven't been to before, then I would urge you to go and visit at draftfc.co.uk for all sorts of stats and analytics for Draft FPL that you will not find anywhere else. And obviously at this stage in the season, we are all planning and prepping for draft day. And so the main thing that you may want to sign up for, particularly if it's getting late in the day and your draft day is looming, the main thing that most people are looking for are draft rankings, which will be there. I will rank my top 240 players. I do 240 on the off chance that you are in a league as big as 16 managers, which I know quite a few of you do play. So I need to rank 240 players to cover you. As well as that, you can see all of the real life drafts happening around the world distilled into an average draft table. So as well as my rankings, you get the global average rankings along with your own intuition and wisdom to hopefully come up with what should be a fairly decent list to crack on with and draft a winning team. Because the visuals are so new and because I hadn't planned on doing a video this weekend, I don't actually have any of our new segment cuts and animations ready just yet, so there won't be any, and we'll roll straight into the content. So let's have a look at the first change. This wasn't the first change that was announced, but it's the first one we're going to talk about today, and that is a change to the assist rule. Now, the announcement came on Saturday morning, just earlier today. The rules for crediting players with assists will be simplified ahead of the new season. The main takeaway is that intention will no longer be judged, and if a player crosses or passes the ball, which then, even if it takes a nick off a defender before the attacker scores, they will still be credited with the assist. The rule does make it clear if the ball ends up touching more than one defender, then there won't be an assist credited, which I think is fair enough. It just stops them being given out if there's a bit of ping pong in the box. This means players with high volume crossing should be in line for more assists this season compared to last year. It does say if the goal scorer is outside of the box and receives it after a deflection or clearance, then the old rules will still apply, which again I think is fair enough. If a cross is put in the box and cleared somewhere outside the D, it seems a bit of a stretch to credit an assist to the original crossing player. They've also clarified assists for handballs. So if a player wins a penalty or a free kick, which is then scored due to an opponent handling it, again, the player who kicked the ball into the opponent's hand would get the assist, regardless of how that contact occurred and regardless of what the intention behind it was. Not a huge game changer, but again, just clarifies it and simplifies it slightly. The announcement sort of speculated on the number of assists that would have been credited last season as a result, and it would have credited an extra 41 assists over the season, which is exactly about where I'd have guessed it to be. So around 1 extra assist per game week. So not enough here to alter our modelling of any particular players, but will of course favour players who already get a lot of assists, and also, as I said, those who get a lot of crosses and a lot of key passes into the box. The next change to discuss, and a change that is very much hot off the press, I think it was published about an hour or two ago as I was midway through prepping this, are changes to the BPS, the bonus points system, which we are familiar with. They've tweaked those before. I believe it was last year that they made tweaks to it, wasn't it? So not something that should be a massive surprise. The take-homes really are less bonus for scoring a penalty, which I think is a good idea. More bonus for goalkeepers saving shots within the penalty area, which again is reasonable. A big boost for goal line clearances, not a huge volume event, but definitely an event that's important and should be credited as such. And a slight simplification for tackles, which should boost players with high volume tackling. So it's not the first time we've seen tweaks, but these changes feel right and move some of the sway back towards goalkeepers, centre-backs, and defensive midfielders, and slightly away from penalty-taking midfielders and strikers. So remember, these changes are to the bonus points system. That's the complicated background algorithm, which is then ranked at full time to award between 1 and 3 points to the highest performing players. So similar to the assist rule change, I don't think there's too much here to affect our modelling or projections heading into the new season. It will, of course, have caused some different outcomes had it been applied last season, but I don't think enough that's really going to massively swing our draft rankings. Then we come to the first change that was announced, and I think most definitely the thing that's going to be important for us draft managers, and that is a brand new way to score points in the game. And FPL have clearly realised that some of the best players on the pitch were not being rewarded, and it was not being reflected in FPL in the work that they do on the more defensive sides. So, metrics which don't always show up in a binary, did they keep a clean sheet or not? So from this season, a player who logs 10 or more clearances, blocks, interceptions, tackles, or ball recoveries will be awarded 2 FPL points. So this is a yes-no metric. You don't get 1 point if you get 5 defensive actions, and you also can't score more than 2 points by exceeding that. So it is capped at 2 points. We are going to sort of refer to these points, these contributions, as CBERT, which is just using clearances, blocks, interceptions, recoveries, and tackles. Now, most of those are fairly self-explanatory as to what they are. Recoveries is a slightly amorphous term, which you'll be very much forgiven for not knowing exactly what that means. And I'll be honest, neither do I. I've seen some videos that FPL have put out. There's one that they put out analysing a game where Caicedo got, I think, 12 defensive contributions and got a lot of recoveries in that game. It's sort of anything that doesn't fit into the other categories. So when the ball kind of rolls loose, a misplaced pass that isn't technically intercepted but maybe bounces off somebody and then is mopped up, that counts as a recovery and counts as a defensive action for the purpose of these points. Goalkeepers get a lot of recovery. So if you think of a through ball that a midfielder might put through that misses everyone and rolls straight through to the keeper, that would be a recovery. So we'll have a look in a minute at some of the tallies from last season, but you'll see for recoveries, goalkeepers basically dominate the whole top of the list. And just another outlet for points. Now, FPL in the announcement kindly provided some numbers for the players who would have benefited the most had these rules been in place last year. And as you'll see, James Tarkowski would have been the biggest winner, collecting an additional 44 points, meaning he hit the threshold in 22 games last season. Second overall with 42 points was Moise Caicedo, and in third was Jan Bednarak on 40 additional points, showing that even busy defenders from struggling teams can pick up very helpful additional points. Now, a player like Bednarak gaining 40 additional points may still not put him on our radar. After all, he finished on 60 points, so even with that boost, would have just about hit 100 points, which over a season is certainly not worthy of a draft pick. So we need to see how this augments players we already have our eye on, and also see if there are players that may have been just outside of our attention who now move into sharper focus. Now, obviously, here at Draft FC, I've got my very own Draft FC Taz, and with very little notice, asked him if he could crunch the numbers for all the players last season to actually see what this would have meant overall. Now, this data has been dredged, as I said, at very short notice, and I'm not going to vouch for it being 100% accurate because we still need to go over it again. But it's very close, and I think it's good enough to illustrate some of the points, and most importantly, inform our draft rankings. And for those who are members at Draft FC, part of the fun is obviously access to our VIP Discord server, and I'll share the link to this data in there, ready for you to peruse and interrogate at your own leisure. We haven't had a chance really to integrate it into the main app yet, as you can imagine, but this should be good enough to scratch the itch for now before we're able to get it into our main tables. So this may be tricky for those on the audio, but I'll try to describe as best I can. For those watching on YouTube, you should now be able to see the database that Taz has rustled up for me. So there are 3 tables to have a look at, which we can come to now. So the top table is showing all of the players with their original FPL points tally, the additional points they would get from their SIBA contributions, which we can then add to form what would have been their new tally. We've also calculated how many extra points per 90 they would have got, because obviously we want to check there weren't any players that are going under the radar just purely because they missed out on a few games, which obviously could have happened for varying reasons due to injury or the like. So if we rank quickly by the new points, we will see we have a reflection of the data that the FPL game posted when they made the announcement. So Tarkowski at the top, Caicedo, Bednarek, etc. So yeah, a good handful of players who over the course of a season with, 30, 35 and over 40 points extra, which doesn't sound a huge amount. And obviously if you break that down, that's pretty much a point per game week. But if you are in a competitive head-to-head league and you own 1 or even 2 of these players, the extra 1 or 2 points per week over the course of a season can create a huge swing. So definitely not to be sniffed at. If we sort, as I said, we've calculated the new points per 90. So if I sort by that, you'll actually see that the players here at the top of this list are largely the same. So those who are getting a good tally overall are also doing very well on a per 90 basis too. The main new name who gets into the top 10 that you may have noticed is Casemiro for Man United. Played around 1,500 minutes last season, got 18 starts and would have collected an additional 24 points for his defensive contributions in games. So he'd have got the 2 points in 12 out of the 18 games that he started. So if Amorim uses him more consistently this season, he could emerge as a very useful player to keep your team ticking over. Bednarek and Burgess perform well in this chart, but are obviously no longer in the league. Norgard also sneaks into the top 10, but will likely take a hit this season, playing more of a supporting role at Arsenal. Now, obviously, at the top of the list again is Tarkowski, will get the attention. However, lest we forget, he finished this campaign with a pretty nasty hamstring injury requiring surgery, and he will be turning 33 this season. So his durability and consistency in the Premier League over the past 8 years has been phenomenal. There are very few that can probably match it. He averages 3,175 minutes a year and has played every minute of a league campaign on 3 separate occasions. But as I said, I do worry about his ability to maintain that again. But certainly when he's fit and healthy, he's going to be a player that is being held in the majority of draft leagues out there. And as you can see there, per 90, he is picking up an additional 1.3 points per week, which, as I said, will be more than enough to swing many head-to-head matchups. The other player to comment here is Elliot Anderson for Nottingham Forest. Now, Forest are going through some changes to their personnel this summer, and we're still not sure if Gibbs White will be there come the start of the season, or at least be there once the transfer window closes. If Gibbs White does leave, then Anderson will probably be tasked with a bit more creative responsibility compared to last season. Now, he managed 2 goals and 6 assists last year. A 50% uptick in that, let's say 3 goals and 9 assists, with exactly the same defensive contributions, could see him get very much into the upper echelons of midfielders who are doing a little bit of everything. So definitely one to keep an eye on. Declan Rice is another one I'm drawn to again this summer. 11 attacking returns last year I think is very reasonable for his role in the side. An extra 0.5 point per week on average for defensive contributions is also very useful. I say the change to the assist rule could also favour a player like Rice, who takes a fair amount of set pieces. If we scroll down to the middle table, one of the other things to point out is, which is probably obvious from the types of players that we've been discussing, is that these new points flow overwhelmingly towards mid and lower table teams, because these are the teams generally who are doing the most defending. So your Evertons, Bournemouths, Forests, Fulhams very much lead the way, and Manchester City's entire squad over last season would have picked up an extra 48 points, which is obviously not too far off the number of extra points James Tarkowski would have gathered himself. Just to hammer that point again, top defenders like Saliba, Vardiol and Alexander-Arnold, who I know has gone, but just to illustrate the point, between all 3 of them would have picked up an additional 28 points. So yeah, very much favours the defenders and midfielders from teams who are battling, which of course makes sense. That table actually shows you where the most valuable positional groups within teams are. So the area that would have got the most new points last season was the Everton defence, and the top 5 were the Everton defence, Forest defence, Fulham defence, Palace defence and the Ipswich defence. The best midfield was Bournemouth, and the Bournemouth midfield would have gathered an extra 92 points over the season. Their defence is also up there with an additional 84. If I go back again, you can see actually how many points each club total got. So Everton lead the way with 188, and if we compare that to Manchester City's 48, a huge swing in terms of making the Everton assets more valuable over the course of the season. The final table is just looking at the data with a bit more of a breakdown. So obviously those SEBA categories, we can actually see the numbers over the season basically. So if we move along, so if we, for example, we can sort by blocks. And the player with the most blocks last year was Nathan Collins, who features quite well on a lot of these lists. And we can also see Tarkowski there in 4th, Murillo in 3rd. So some of those big, busy centre-backs doing well on blocks, which is very much what we would expect. In terms of tackling, the player who was number 1 for tackles with 133 was Idrissa Gueye. Again, makes sense. Very busy central defensive midfielder. And we see a number of those CDMs high on the list here, with João Gomez, Caicedo, McAllister and Andre for Wolves as well in there. As well as defenders, of course, you've got Munoz, Mazraoui and Anthony Robinson all doing a lot of tackles. Interceptions leading the way, Wan-Bissaka, which very much fits his profile, and Anthony Robinson again doing well on that list. Clearances, as we get to the end, 242. Big Ed Murillo leads the way there. Nathan Collins also high up on the list, as well as Tarkowski, Milenkovic, Lacroix, Kilman, Byrne. All the guys that you know are getting their head and clearing crosses out of the box. And then finally, that ball recovery marker. And as I said to you earlier, goalkeepers overwhelmingly dominate this metric. As you can see, for those that are watching, the top sort of 15 to 20 are all goalkeepers. The outfielder who actually gets on the list first is Caicedo. followed by Elliot Anderson. So mostly midfielders who are getting these defenders. Don't really seem to attract very well on this metric. So as I said, for those who are members, I'll link this in our Discord later on, and you'll be able to have a fiddle with this at your own leisure. So based on the data, and say this is very much on just a couple of hours of skimming through this and thinking about it, and also just some gut feel of how I think this will apply. There are a few names here that I will have my eye on who are definitely going to be moving higher up my watch list when doing the draft rankings. So two big areas, dominating centre-backs, so Tarkowski and Branthwaite, Milenkovic and Murillo, Collins, Kilman, Lacroix for Palace, I think are all going to do very well out of this new scoring system. And then the busy central midfielders, Caicedo, Rodri, of course, Anderson, Rice, Joao Gomez, and Idrissa Gueye, all could be very useful week-to-week pickups depending on the fixtures. The one thing I haven't had a chance to do and will do before getting into the proper draft prep content is having a look at some of the game-by-game breakdowns of this, which I know Taz has. He's just been a bit too busy to get it to me so far, because it would be interesting to see what type of fixtures these players are more likely to get those 2 points in. I mean, you would imagine games in which they are on paper outmatched are going to allow them to get more tackles, clearances, etc., because they're going to be doing more defending. You know, Tarkowski, Everton, having a sort of rare possessionally dominant game against Southampton could be a game where he does miss out on the 2 points. So, you know, that's a hypothesis, but it would be good to back that up with some numbers. So yeah, that's probably where the remaining work needs to go. The big one to talk about, I think, is Bruno Fernandes. Now, in terms of his history, in the full 5 seasons, he's never appeared for fewer than 3,000 minutes. 17 is his floor for attacking returns, and 150 FPL points is a disappointing year for him. All this is, of course, in front of a backdrop of managerial changes, inept teammates, and a generally toxic atmosphere. So imagine what he could do over a season now where the vibes are good, surrounded by some quality talent, which United look like they're trying their best to bring in. Last season, his average draft pick was 12th overall. He notched 174 points, and with the additional defensive Siebert points would have seen an additional 22, which would have pushed his tally to 196 points, putting him as the 7th best player overall in the game, so nudging him up the ranks a few spots. So knocking on the door of the 200 club, which, you know, if you can get your first round pick anywhere in and around that 200 point mark, then you have safely navigated round one and have set yourself up on a platform for a successful season, regardless of what else you do. 20 attacking returns last year, best return since the 2021 season, where he got a peak of 32 returns. The only player in the opening 2 rounds, or the only player likely to be in my opening 2 rounds, to get any kind of meaningful boost from the new Siebert metric. So what does that mean for his draft rank ahead of the 25-26 season? It's not set in stone yet, but it's certainly going to be in single figures for me, certainly going to be in the top 10. It's just how high he gets. Can he bridge the gap between what seems to be a fairly obvious clutch of players at the beginning of the opening round, to a point where I know lots of managers right now would be quite fearful of drafting in sort of, you know, between 6th and 9th. It does feel on paper that the drop-off could be bigger, but perhaps with these added points, I say, it could bring a few other players into the frame a lot better. Yeah, interesting one. But I say, if I was drafting in 7th and Bruno was there right now, I would be more than happy to, I'd pick him up instantly. But it's just whether or not I end up ranking him even higher than that. We'll have to see. That's one thing, actually. Let's go back to the data I was showing earlier. because if we sort again by the new totals, you can see that for the top sort of 15 to 20 players, let's say Bruno very much stands out with his additional points. So, the likes of Salah, Isak, Chris Wood, Watkins, Visser, Diaz, Haaland, all of them would have got 0 additional points last year, which of course makes sense. They're not there to tackle and intercept and clear. Brian Mbeumo would have got a handful. Palmer would have got 2 points on one single game week. Bowen would have got an extra 6 points. So not huge swings there, but would have been nice little bonuses. But yeah, Bruno there, really the player that's the sort of most versatile in how he can score points now with assists, goals, and now these defensive actions. We scroll down further, really, we then get into the only players that now start creeping into the list with big additions are the defenders. So Milenkovic's total last year would have been 171. Murillo's would have been 168, just behind Van Dijk. He's an interesting pick as well because obviously a big platform in terms of he got 143 points as it stood. Playing in a team like Liverpool, you might expect that there wouldn't be a huge amount to do. But as we know from the eye test, Van Dijk is a busy defender. He likes to rush out, get to the ball first. He's not one to just sit back in a solid line. That's kind of what makes him the defender he is. He would have got an additional 22 points, so his total would have gone to 165 as well, which is a lot more what we're familiar with when it comes to those sort of A-star Liverpool defenders. So he's an interesting one to watch. Vardiol, just as I said, an extra 10 points from last season, so it doesn't really impact him very much at all, though it will be interesting to see because I don't think he's going to be playing left back quite as much as he was now that Aït-Nouri's in there. So I think he will suffer. He will have a bit of a drop off. And Nathan Collins, say 32 additional points on a baseline of 127 would have pushed him to 159. So whereas 48 hours ago I was planning on draft rankings that probably didn't have a defender inside the opening 4, maybe 5 rounds for an 8-team league, I'm now having to seriously consider putting some of these guys in, particularly some of the stable, like the likes of Murillo and Milenkovic. If they stick around as a stable centre-back pairing for Forest going into this season, then knowing what their attributes are and how they defend, could well warrant a reasonably high draft pick. So one of the things which I've talked about in previous episodes for previous roads to draft day, when looking at some of the theory of draft prep, is the idea of value above replacement, which is a way of numerically shuffling players into a list. So whether they're defenders, midfielders, or forwards, to take account of the positional scarcity that comes from those positions and still being able to rank them appropriately. So let's say, which this kind of analysis, when you're just looking at points tally, doesn't do. And you'd have heard me harp on about it before. You'll hear me harp on about it again all summer, which is that, a forward who scores 30 points less than Milenkovic is still going to be a player that you want to draft higher, which I know for new draft managers, they would just think, well, if I knew this was the tally in, going into the season, then it's a no-brainer. I'd take Milenkovic over the likes of Mateta, but not how it works. So let's say we'll get into that when we get into some of the more proper draft prep over the coming couple of weeks or so. But yeah, Bruno is definitely going to be one to have your eye on, and one that I think, depending on how certain United fans overanalyze the situation, he could be going pretty high on draft day, and you may even see some other players that you would have in your top sort of 4 sinking to you as low as kind of 6th or 7th. So anyway, we'll come on to that in good time, but for now I think we will have to leave things there. So say if this is your first time on the channel or listening to the podcast, then make sure you are subscribed or following so you don't miss out on any future content as it drops. So there will be a lot of content coming out over the next few game weeks as we prepare for draft day, and then of course prepare for game week 1. There isn't going to be a set schedule, as you might have seen from years past. I could drop 3 episodes in as many days and then go a few days without. So yeah, stay subscribed so that you don't miss out. Give us a follow on X as well, where you'll get notified whenever we release new content. And as I say, if you want to be a lot more prepped and have a lot more insight this season, then I would urge you to check out our site at draftfc.co.uk, particularly once the game goes live and we've got it all nicely set up. You're going to want to look at those draft stats and analytics, which you won't find anywhere else. My complete 240 player ranking, which I'll also update pretty much most days as well as a daily updated table showing you where every player has been drafted in real world drafts all over the draft universe. Also, just I should say, this year, as part of the content I've got slated in the schedule, for the first time ever, I will be discussing my unabridged top 20 draft rankings on here on the pod. So if you subscribe for anything, at least let it be for that. And I'll discuss and dissect those top 20 picks in some detail on, all the players I think are going to be going in the opening 2 rounds. Those of you that have followed for a few years now will know that I've sort of teased the rankings. I'll have given you maybe, I've got Watkins as my 3rd striker and I've got Mateta as my 7th striker, and kind of, if you want to fill in the gaps, you've got to sign up. So I'm still going to leave the majority of the ranks in there for the members, but the first top 20 picks will be on here sort of publicly for the first time. Now, I'll say it in that episode, it will be subject to change based on the date that comes out, because I'm tweaking my ranks every day as new information occurs, and that can be as simple as a new signing going to that team that then has a knock-on effect on that player. So it can change all the way up to the end of game week 3, where the transfer window will still be open. The other thing I'll be doing over the coming weeks is I'll be showing at some point a live draft involving some of the best draft managers I can assemble from around the world. So as well as my rankings, you can see a real one play out before your eyes with my sort of instant reaction to each pick as it lands. I still haven't decided if I'm going to try and stream that live. Like live is not something I've done before, so it's slightly daunting, but it'll appear one way or the other, and it won't be a draft that I'm participating in, just to be clear. So I'll be kind of a very neutral presence looming over it. So I've got some good managers lined up to go into that. So yeah, keep your eyes peeled for that when it comes out. And remember as well, if you are a signed up member, you get access to the exclusive Discord server, and that alone should be worth the sign-up fee, because the draft expertise in our community is second to none. So that'll do for this episode. Back to the planned content I was prepping for after this one, and ahead of what will be another nervy summer of draft prep. Stay shook.